Hi, this is Andrew Groh with the Missouri Society of CPAs. This is MOCPA Bar Talk, where we talk about the latest trends, news, and issues that matter to you the most. Let's get started. Hi, welcome to another edition of Bar Talk. I'm Andrew Groh, and I'm here today with Brent Wood. Brent, welcome to the show.
Thank you,
Brent's
Andrew.
the CFO from with the Terminal Railroad Association here in the St. Louis metro area. Brent, we're here today to talk a little bit about what you do, the things that are important to you, CFO skills of the future, maybe some data visualization, things that you and your team, tools that you're using. Welcome, and can you tell us a little bit about yourself and about your business?
Yeah, I'm pleased to be here with you this morning. So Terminal Railroad is owned by 5 Class 1 railroad owners, but we're an independently run company, and we do switching in St. Louis. We own the 2 river bridges that cross the Mississippi River, so it's a big deal to the National Freightway. And so our task from the board and from the owners is to make that gateway as efficient and low cost as possible.
That's great. How long have you been with Terminal Railroad?
Yeah, so I came to Terminal, I believe, in March of 2017.
Okay.
So I've only been there 3 years.
Couple of years,
Yeah,
but
yeah.
What was your career path?
So my background was I started in public accounting with the firm Connor Ash and Company.
Okay.
And I think they're still around in
our
one
friends.
form or another.
Our friends there, yeah.
And so spent about 4 years with Connor Ash and landed at a coal company that was moving from Chicago, Ziegler Coal Holding Company in Fairview Heights. And I spent about 20 years with Ziegler and the successor companies. It was sold at one point, went public and then sold. But I did stints in internal audit, budgeting, accounting manager, division controller. I got into the operations side, and that's really where I felt like my career took a turn when I got into the operations side. And then ended up back at Peabody for a while.
Yep.
And they developed the Prairie State Generating Campus in Marissa, Illinois. Spent 4.5 years with them, and then went to a startup coal company that worked out well. I wished it would have been my last job of my career. It didn't work out that way. So when I left that company, they were sold. I was sort of looking for that last career move and landed at Terminal Railroad just by happenstance. Ran into someone who was familiar with the company and knew they were looking for someone, and it worked out.
That's great, and I think a lot of our members and other CPAs further along in their career, I think, follow similar trajectories, spending some amount of time in public practice, and then moving to business industry type jobs, government, maybe education, and then up toward to CFO. So what's it like being a CFO of a big company?
So, big, maybe medium sized, but we actually are a company that has more small practices, medium sized, but we have Class 1 owner type assets.
Okay.
Those 2 bridges are, the lifeblood of the rail industry in St. Louis. So when you cross the river, you have to go across one of our bridges.
Right. How are you going to get from one side of Illinois to Missouri without it?
Right. And then we also do the handoffs between the railroads. So if one railroad wants to bring a train through, then they have to come through the terminal to make that connection. So it's a unique organization. I've lived in this area all my life and never heard of Terminal Railroad Association before this.
Well, a lot of people are going to hear about Terminal Railroad after this podcast. So what about your team? What does your team look like? You mentioned ownership group, your role as CFOs, I'm sure peers there, and then maybe your team. What does your team look like?
Yeah, so I'll just talk about the company a little. We have about 225 to 240 employees. It depends on the situation at the time, but somewhere it ranges in there. My staff is 5 folks in accounting, in various roles. I have HR, I have IT, and I have warehouse and purchasing. So kind of wear multiple hats and spend, probably IT is where I've spent quite a bit of the time since I've been here as we upgrade and move to the cloud. So that's been a big time burner, which is good.
Yep, and
in a good way.
The wearing multiple hats is a theme that we hear quite often with members and CPAs with CFO roles. You mentioned a couple of them. Again, how do you kind of interface with your team? Managing multiple kind of verticals like that. Is that challenging?
Yeah. So it's two parts. One is the senior team, when we pretty much collaborate on most every major problem or opportunity. And then as far as the staff, I like to empower people to get their job done. So I try to kind of set some guardrails and then let them solve the issues and the problems and processes. And we're, a 130-year-old company has a lot of processes that are ingrained for a long time, and to change those and, going to the cloud's pretty traumatic.
Yeah.
And so, I feel like you have to give people the power to do their job. So I try to stay out of the way on day-to-day issues.
That's fantastic. Sounds like you've got a lot of great team members, feeding you the decision-making information you need, working with you. It's perfect, and it also lines up, I think, really well with what our profession is talking about for maybe the CFO of the future. So let's talk a little bit now about skill sets. You've been in various roles throughout your career. What do you see right now in 2020 that maybe is different in years past? What are the skill sets for your position, other CFOs that maybe have changed in the last several years, and what are ones that are coming up that you see are big needs for CFOs to get a hold of?
Sure. So, hate to admit it, but I've been around long enough to see a lot of change, a career of over 30 years. But I think in the last 5 years, and I've been in more the controller role up until this job, but you're still close enough to that CFO position to understand the morphosis that's going on. But it used to be more of a traditional, to me, a CPA, knew the treasury side, the finance, the insurance, those traditional debt management functions. But the last 4 to maybe 6 years, I've noticed that it's more operational. And so I probably spend 15 to 20% of my time on either business development or operational opportunities at the operation. So actually, I'm pretty dressed up for the railroad. I would rather be out at the operation, and maybe I learned that from my switching careers there midstream, where I was not forced but encouraged to go to operations. And when I got to that point, I don't want to go back.
Sure.
So this job has turned out to be a perfect match for me, because it's probably more operational than it is financial, or at least 50-50. So I think if someone wants to develop the skills to be a CFO, you're going to have to really be interested in the operation, understanding how it works, what makes it tick, and then the other side of that's the relationship. Building with the folks in operations. Sometimes there's sort of a two sets of languages that go with, there's the operational side and the financial side. And in a lot of companies, they don't really talk much. They don't trust each other. They're not open. And to really be in this role, you have to have an open dialogue with people. They have to trust you. You have to trust them. And so I spent a lot of time building those relationships, and I feel like we have a good thing going.
So you get to bridge up those conversations with your financial expertise and background. It sounds like you spend many years now not just learning, but directing and working with the operations side. Where do those conversations collide? Do they collide at kind of the C-suite level with your peers? Do they happen with your team and across? Where do you have those conversations, maybe on a day-to-day or month-to-month basis?
Yeah, so I wouldn't call them clashes so much, but I know with our accounting and finance team, they were not used to that approach. So it's interesting. I've had a couple of my folks say, I've been here a lot longer than you, and I don't understand as much about railroading as you do, and I by no means am even a intermediate user, but that kind of tells me that, that's a change in philosophy for the company.
Sure.
And so I've been encouraging my folks to be involved in the operation to the point where I've forced a couple of them to meetings before. Just you got to get used to dealing with the operation side if you're going to move up.
So in terms of the skills that you've been able to develop over your career to allow you to have these great conversations and navigate kind of the financial and operational side for your company, where did you develop those skills? First of all, what are some of the key
Sure.
ones that you're looking at, and where did you develop those skills over time?
So obviously the technical skills, I think some of that is hereditary. Some of that is just developing, but I've never been one to stay in my lane, so to speak. And so I would spend a lot of time, maybe some would say wasted time, but talk to HR a lot, talk to other purchasing groups, and I learned some of those skills just by, hey, tell me about this.
Mm-hmm.
Teach, I don't understand, why you hold this up every time for this process, but so I think that's where some of it comes, just that inquisitive mind.
Exploring things, right? Intentionally.
Right.
Too,
Wanting to know, instead of here's the process, well, why is the process
right.
the process? And at Terminal and other companies I've worked at, some are very good at staying in their lanes, and if you get out of your lane,
people might get a little upset.
Yeah,
maybe.
People get a little upset. And then I've worked at a lot of collaborative places as well that, and I like the collaborative, skill set as far as personality. I'm comfortable around people, but believe it or not, I'm a little shy. If we're at a party, I might be the one over standing in the corner not saying much.
I've known you for a couple of years, Brent. That doesn't sound quite right.
But so I work on that pretty hard, to overcome that bit of a shyness. Depends on what I'm doing and what we're talking about.
That's fair. So looking at again to the skill sets, it's an interesting one. If you look at what the AICPA is talking about right now, and our profession saying these are these skills that CPAs and CFOs need to really not just pay attention to, but hone for the future. You look at things like emotional intelligence and IQ. People like being able to read people and what they're doing and why they're doing it. Communication skills. Soft skills that if you rolled back what's important 10, 12 years ago, those skills would have been towards the bottom of the list, where technical acumen was at the top of the list. Is that kind of what you sensed over the last couple of years also? Are you seeing those transitions?
I absolutely am, and I make fun of millennials a lot. But I think they've actually led us in a direction that we needed more of as a profession.
And what's that? Explain that a little bit.
I think I have seen, even at CPA firms that I've dealt with, the quality of life, family's important. It's about a job and it's about getting work done and being productive, but there's another side to life. And I think I just see that those soft skills, I still like to tease folks and, get to work. What have you done today? All those cliches. But spending a little more time with folks, getting to know them a little bit. What's their family? Everybody comes from a different place, and understanding that helps you manage across the organization.
Sure, and of course we can't lose sight of technical acumen, right?
Absolutely not. Technology is one area that CPAs normally would be involved in, but big data, that's sort of the cliche, but I think we are data driven and we need to embrace that.
And thank you for, I think that's maybe where this conversation was heading. What is changing all of those things right now? And what we're hearing is technology. So maybe let's switch gears a little bit and talk a little bit about kind of maybe even data, to your point, data visualization, data analytics. These are things that are not just tools anymore. They're not pieces that financial professionals and account professionals like you look at or look behind. They're now being used for future looks, business decision making. How are you guys using data sets, data science, data tools, and visualization to power your business?
That's a really good point, and it kind of plays into the CFO role as well, and that's to provide the data. It used to be you crunch the numbers, you give it back to the user, but it's after the fact.
And what do they say?
And,
well, that's
and,
great. But
yeah, that's great, but what can I couldn't affect change with that.
Sure.
And it tells me what happened. And so I think we're more forward looking now. And so that data technology gives you the ability to manage on a real time basis. So I'll give you a couple examples of systems that we are implementing, but one of them is our crew management system. And that's what schedules our crews. It's what we enter the time against. It's what we base payroll on. It's sort of the lifeblood of the employee side on the hourly side. And the system we have right now is an old legacy system. It does a great job with payroll. But if you ask a simple question, what's my overtime percentage? It took an hour and a half to figure that out. I should be able to look at that on the screen.
Dashboard.
What did I work? What did the last shift do?
Right.
And so we are implementing a system that will do that. It's cloud-based, but it comes with Microsoft BI capability, so you can make those visualizations whatever you want them to be.
That's awesome.
And what the users, and so I don't have to be involved in that process. We set up the system. Our operations manager and his supervisors are the ones that need that information. I don't need it till it's time for payroll.
Right.
And
Power BI is certainly one of the big data visualization tools available right now. Pretty powerful from what I understand. What was your role in implementing?
I think it's very important though to know that you can't rely on, you need to understand the processes in the business before you can go to the data.
Right.
Because you really have to know what it means, and to know what it means you have to understand the operation. So it's great to say I have big data, I have a system that'll do that, but you have to have people that understand what it means and how to affect change. You can't just stand it up and walk away.
Sure. And so, where in that data? So in one of the previous podcasts, and I think we had talked about this before about data science, right? And this is what you're talking about is you can't just pick one piece of kind of a process and data and I don't know if trust is the right word, but say yes, this is exactly what we need to be able to make business decisions, right? You got to understand kind of where things start, how data is cleaned, and on back end how to show it.
Does it make sense?
Yeah.
And so that's where you have to understand the operation, because you get numbers that don't make sense. If you don't realize they don't make sense, it doesn't really help anybody.
So how far down in that data kind of spectrum do you and your team get with kind of knowing the operations? Are you really in the weeds? Or do you work with your team, other teams and managers to pull that data in, and then your team scrubs it? How do you?
Well, so let's take the crew management system as an example, and as they're entering time against the schedule, there are call them bots, call them algorithms, whatever you want to call them.
Bots today.
We'll call them bots.
Yeah.
But, so you'll set up business rules. You'll design those business rules. And so what we're going to be able to do on the crew management side is probably cut down by 80% the review time, to know that we have the right time on the right people. Just from the reporting, the system will tell you what the exceptions are that you need to look at. They may be right, they may be wrong, but right now you're looking at 225 records when it's payroll time to see, did that vacation come through, did this come through?
Right.
Those rules are all designed and set. You've now freed up 80% of that review time to do something more important.
Process automation.
Yeah.
That's where, again, going all the way back to what's driving a lot of this change. It's what we're hearing. Technology driving the ability to be able to move up that value chain, and instead of looking behind, taking a look at these data sets and saying, okay, these are the exceptions, let's review them, and then let's figure out what happens moving forward.
Right. Because you can't really control it or affect change unless you understand it, and unless you can claim it. It's right there on the screen. I didn't authorize that, or it just affects change. I think one of the other issues, the other side of this technology is it obviously tends to cut people, and that's the other side of this equation. But in our business, and even on the mining side as well, most of those changes are behind us. That now that's not to say there won't be more and more efficiency, but what we're looking to do with this technology is not to cut people at this point.
Sure.
It's to free up that time to do something more value added. It's not. So, example, before I got here, we used to have about 20 clerks. We're down to probably 6 or 7 in the operations. That's the kind of the phase 1 and 2 of all the automation.
Mm-hmm.
That's just the reality. It's the AEI readers, and it's the automation where it's gathering all this information. Now we're not looking for the technology to necessarily cut people. It's more to free up the time to do something more productive.
More powerful tools at your disposal, right? And moving you and your team up that, the value chain. And we've talked a lot about that as a profession. And I know we talk quite a bit about, these types of things for your company and for other companies from a CFO's perspective. There is a similar conversation going on right now for how technology is disrupting CPA firms. And I think what we're kind of learning is that businesses like yours are leading the way, paving the path for CPA firms, showing kind of how process automation can be effective, better ways to leverage technology and repurpose, people skills, those types of things. And I think we're squarely in the middle for CPA firms of that transition that it sounds like you guys have already picked up and managed to.
Yeah, at least we've recognized it and are actually acting upon it. So one area that we're really going to get some value out of in the future is our document control and AP side.
Tell us a little bit about that.
Right now we are processing everything manually. It comes in and you run the invoices through. There may be POs to match against that. It's somewhat automated, but we have someone dedicated to AP, and I have been working with him to, hey, we need to get this automation done because I would like to make your position part-time. And I don't mean that I'm going to make you a part-time employee. I want you over and I want you over at the operations. If you're going to be of value long-term to the company, you've got to understand where you can add value. And you're not adding value by making sure this invoice ties to this
one,
and matches. So, we're looking at once we get our financial system to the cloud, of going through that document control process where maybe half of your invoices you don't touch. If everything matches up, it just goes in the system by itself. That now frees up a lot of time. So
it sounds like it frees up a lot of time. We hear this over and over again. Going back to earlier's conversation, for you to wear more hats. That sounds sounds great. And your team, right? So now you're working on HR related stuff, financials, maybe risk management. So something that I know we were excited to chat a little bit about today, and maybe a segue, risk management. It's a big topic in our profession. Something that CFOs like you, I know, are top of mind quite a bit. Can you share a little bit about what your thoughts are on risk management programs, the value, and some of the things that you and Terminal Railroad Association are doing in that space?
Sure. Well, I think traditionally risk management has meant something happens, I have a plan to react to it.
Right.
And what we've, in the last couple of years, realized, and we've actually reaped a little bit of benefit on the insurance side from doing this. You get some value out of if you can show the underwriters that you're being proactive. But we'll do a lot of what ifs, and just on a day-to-day basis. If I think our senior team is 5 people, including the president. But if we see something, say something. So we have regular meetings twice a month. It's dedicated time, and we bring our issues or what we need from each other, or risks that we've identified. Is this a risk or isn't it? It may not be, but just something you observe. That maybe we ought to be on top of this before something happens. Now we have our traditional tabletop exercises. A rail car derails, it has hazardous waste on it. or hazardous chemicals, and what's our plan?
What's the
And,
plan?
yeah, we do all those tabletop exercises and coordinating with all the emergency rescue, and we have 2 bridges, so we have to have rescue plans if a train gets stranded on the bridge.
Sure.
All those things, those are easy to identify, but and data-driven risks have become a bigger and bigger issue. Hacking.
Yeah.
And that's something maybe as simple as training your employees. You get this link in the email, don't click on it.
Sure.
Understand that's could be a hack. And so we do those types of proactive training with folks. And then we also work with our underwriters. We view our insurance as a partner, particularly our broker. But if they can't help us identify risk and mitigate it, then probably need to look for somebody else.
Sure.
That's what controls the cost.
Yeah, and I know that in our profession there are not many, but a few different frameworks through which a company like yours tend to work risk management issues through. I know COSO is a big one, and I think adopted by a lot of CPAs and businesses. Is there a framework that you guys use? The meeting twice a month, is that part of a bigger picture and a plan? Tell us a little bit about what lens do you guys view?
So we do have a standard agenda for that risk meeting. We call it our RAM committee, risk assessment mitigation meeting. You have to come up with an acronym nowadays. But we do have a standard agenda of topics that, if absent anything that jumps above those, that we'll talk about. And I'm familiar with COSO from my internal audit days in the 90s, and then COSO's changed a little bit, but it does provide a good framework. And I actually snuck a peek at COSO in the last week since I knew I was doing this.
Right.
And I would say that ours is probably not intentionally necessarily, but 50% of what we do probably fits in that framework.
Right.
And it's more about identifying something, what could happen, not being reactive.
Right.
And I think that's really what COSO is trying to get at.
It is, and I think again tying this in with the data conversation that we talked about before, being able to see potential issues in data is becoming more and more important, and allow you guys to take a proactive approach. How do you bridge bringing in data into these conversations where you're saying, maybe I'm looking at financial risk assessment along with all of these other types of risks that we need to assess?
Well, I think where a lot of this starts is when systems talk to systems. So if you have an integrated SAP system that's made to fit, that all work, that they kind of take care of that for you, so to speak. But when you're a company like us where you have to pick, we're in an industry that's you just don't pull software off the shelf. So you're picking and choosing vendors and software. One of the key aspects of that process is data security. How do they manage that data? How does it integrate? Does what comes out of one system go in the other system, and how reliable is that? And one of the things that that sort of happened in the last year or two, it used to be more batch processing. It used to be more FTP type of a transfer. It's now more of an API, which is real time.
Yeah.
So I effect a transaction over here, it's already over here.
Yeah.
I really got to be able to pressure test that during implementation.
Immediately too. Yeah.
Yeah. And so and then it gets back to the bots and the algorithms, is what's coming out of here going in there, and if it doesn't, there was an interruption, or maybe the internet went down and there was a blip, and so at least it notifies you that
for testing
there's
and
a problem
for future looks. Yeah. So have you, as Terminal Railroad Association, engaged in a cybersecurity audit before in the past? I know that's a big thing now. CPAs, especially in the public practice side, are heavily involved in systems auditing. And oh, by the way, this is where our profession is talking about the future of the audit being exactly what you talked about. Auditing systems, where are they talking with each other correctly? Where are the pressure points for cybersecurity? All of these things. What are your guys' thoughts?
Yeah, so, and this is not to pat myself on the back, because it really was a reactive step when something did happen. But we had a minor potential hack. It was not, it turned out we could never find the evidence that it really was. No one was harmed by it, but it kind of opened our eyes that, okay, we've got to be more proactive about this. We didn't have even a cyber insurance policy. Now, we're not a retail outfit. We're not accepting credit cards and debit cards and managing a lot of personal information. But everyone has data that's, it's on the HR side. It's HIPAA. You can get in big trouble in a number of areas, so you can't ignore that. So we did get a policy, but part of that also made us do some system audits, some both internal and external. So we did three things. We did a security audit from the standpoint of making the connection. If you use Verizon, AT&T, whatever your provider is, or Spectrum, But so doing the connection between in-house and out.
External, yeah.
Yeah, and so we did that, and that was performed. AT&T did ours, and we just engaged them. It was not a large cost, but they do that every year just to kind of kick the tires, and it tests your routers and all of your hardware, and tells you where you're vulnerable.
Sure.
The first time we did it, we got a D-.
Right.
Okay, that wakes you up.
I would not have wanted to be in that twice-a-month meeting after that data came through. But go ahead, yeah.
I'm happy to say we're up to a B+ now.
That's
on that
well
end.
done, yeah.
And some of that was just a company that had declining revenues, didn't have the resources, maybe didn't get keyed in that it was that critical.
Sure.
And so when you let your systems kind of go for a couple, 2-3 years, things change, and so you just become more and more vulnerable. So we have stepped that up, and part of that going to the cloud in a lot of our critical applications has been part of that. So that was one part, was the kind of the external internal connection. Then we went to a forensic firm, and they reviewed our processes, our diagrams, our charts. Our IT director, we have really a staff of one. He's very high-end person. I think KPMG did a lot of consulting with them. We're lucky to have him, and he's kind of been the one that's transitioned us to be more current. But that, Dave did his own assessment, and then we had a forensic firm look at that. The other thing we did was we had our insurance underwriter, and it was part of the program. We didn't have to pay for that one. But having the some would say jaundiced eye of an underwriter, but they came in and pressure tested everything and gave us a report. It wasn't perfect, but it was, we're in probably the 80 percentile or 75 percentile, which if we'd have done that, back 2 years ago, it would have been
D+ or whatever. Yeah,
exactly.
Okay,
But during that time, when we had the potential hack, we had a forensic attorney who had folks too look at the systems as well. They were the ones that told us, hey, we can't find evidence that anybody really was in your system. So, we think you're okay. But I would encourage everyone to look at cyber insurance, and it's harder to get now, but if nothing else, it steps up your game on testing your systems.
That's perfect. I know one thing that we want to talk about today to transition just a little bit, and maybe go back to a tiny bit of the conversation from earlier. Your management style. Let's talk a little bit about your teams and how do you manage with them and for them, and the idea that in a C-suite role you have to manage both across to your peers, up to either shareholders or ownership, and then of course your team. How does that all work for you?
Sure, and maybe it would help too to to kind of point out that probably I would say 15% of my time is spent on those owner board relationships in one form or another, and so I probably don't get as much time as I'd like to walk around and manage. But I think that's probably a good thing, because some would say I would just get in the way. Because I told folks when I came, my goal is when I step away from terminal, hopefully it's voluntarily, but when I step away from terminal, I don't want to be needed anymore.
Right.
You guys need to be self-sufficient and think for yourself, and come with solutions, not what do I do with this.
Sure.
And that's a different style than, hey, I want to know, as a CFO, I want to know about every decision, so bring everything to me. There's no way. I mean, I could not live in that environment. So I try to empower folks. I mean, you have to give them training as well, or coaching. There's a lot of coaching, okay, well, let's solve this one together, but here's what I want you to think about.
Right. And how do you actualize that style? I get it, and I think that's what there's many successful CFOs and teams that are implementing those principles. How do you kind of on a day-to-day, week-to-week, month-to-month, quarter-to-quarter, how do you actualize that?
Well, and this may not be to your question, but the first question I've learned to ask is, well, what do you think we ought to do? It throws it right back on them and then maybe a couple times they do that, but then at some point they start researching and the options. So now almost everyone brings in options if they're stuck. I'm not sure what I should do here. Well, let's look at and so that makes it a lot easier for everybody. But it's a great training tool.
So are many of your team members then presenting solutions to you and your executive team? I guess maybe instead of presenting problems now.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely,
That's fantastic.
absolutely. And I try to stay out of people's way, but that's not always easy, because there's still those days where you need something now.
Right.
And I know what you're working on is important, but I've got to have this. But I try to avoid that as much as possible. We were never too goal oriented. I think if you went back 10 years in terminal, we weren't too goal oriented, and we are much more goal oriented now. And so you have your day-to-day duties, but you've got the bigger picture in mind. It's these automation tools. It's the document control. It's those things that are going to make us more value added as a group. That's what we want to have people working on. You still have to get the heavy lifting done every day, but we want people to be focused on that.
So that's good. Those are some tools and philosophy, strategy you get for your team members. What about your peers? So Chief Information Officer, Chief Executive Officer, those meetings, where are those conversations oftentimes, as you're pulling up these potential issues and solutions, sharing them across, your executive team? What happens after those meetings come out and say, okay, Brent, your team's doing a great job here. Think about these
I've never heard that before.
Where do those conversations go? How do you take those back and back down to your team? Communication's key, right?
Sure, and I think one of the things that I could improve on is getting the folks in the accounting department in those meetings more often. Now, sometimes they're not really, appropriate for them to be at meetings such as that. But when you're talking, we do a lot of business development meetings and strategy meetings that, particularly that middle level finance and accounting person should be exposed to.
Right.
Because it's easy to sit back and say, well, we should have done this, we should have done that. Well, if you were in those meetings and you understood the options, you would understand, and maybe you have a solution for that. I certainly don't, not having been there more than 3 years, I don't even know how, I brag about this. I haven't done a journal entry. I haven't logged in the ledger.
What's a journal entry,
yeah,
right?
What's a ledger? I haven't had time to do that yet.
Sure.
And so those types of solutions are going to come from, you hope, from your folks.
Team, yeah.
And you just need to give them credit when that happens.
That's great. And then of course you have your shareholders, your business owners, maybe your board. As you and your executive team are considering what they're talking about, it sounds like you guys are the nexus, kind of between, of course, business operations and board and business decisions. How are you pulling those conversations in, from your team and managing those conversations right in the C-suite?
Well, and I think that may be why it was surprising to me that it was that much of my time. But you have to foster those relationships to get things done. Particularly right now where we have multiple construction projects going on. We're rebuilding one of our bridges. The owners are financing that. We have a bank loan to finance that, but the owners are backstopping that. And so obviously that's very important to the owners. It's very important to us. We don't want to come in over budget.
Sure.
So anticipating what a board wants at a board meeting. We have quarterly meetings, and they're pretty formal. There's a normal agenda, but trying to identify, if I was a board member, what would I want to see?
Yeah.
And everyone comes from a different background. You have engineering folks, you have finance folks, lawyers. There's a good mix of different disciplines, and so everyone has sort of their own preference.
Right?
Yeah. So just managing that, I think that's where all that time comes from. And I don't mean that in a bad way. That 15%, what it makes me do is be sharper.
Sure.
With my decision making and focus. I can really, I've got to get ready for the board meeting. Well, that almost gets me through the problem.
Sure.
Here's the steps. It becomes clearer. You can get a timeline laid out, get the issues laid out, and then that makes that dialogue very easy.
Yeah.
So.
And I think I think it's something that certainly see other CFOs in your role are actively managing up, down, and across, like this conversation. We talk often about different CFOs wearing different hats, so that the issues that might bubble up, with you and other CFOs may be a little bit different. But I think I've heard many conversations where the considerations are at least similar.
Sure.
And when you talk with other CFOs and peers, are you hearing some same things?
Yeah, I am. But I do think, and I sympathize with the public company CFO. I would never. Why I say that, I'm not sure that I would want to be in that role. I've been on the accounting side of a public company, a couple of them, and just the risk exposure.
Sure.
That you don't get the depth of the operations, and I'm more of a probably the terminal railroad's perfect for me because I don't have to deal with the public company issues, because I think that probably burns a lot of time. Yeah, and it burns people out, and so. But I still think there's a core of competencies and crossover. But I probably spend more of my time on HR and IT and other disciplines where a public company is going to have someone who's sort of responsible for just that area.
Right.
So I think it depends on whether you want to be a jack of all trades or
a specialist,
really a specialist.
Right? Yeah. And I think that's where a lot of I think CPAs and other professionals think about when they think about career trajectory and those types of things. Specialist, generalist, what speaks to me and where am I most comfortable?
Right.
In? Right. And it sounds like you've landed in a great place for you.
I certainly have.
So we're kind of wrapping things up. I did want to ask: Are there a thing or two that you'd really like to chat about today that we haven't already touched on for CPAs and our members?
Oh, I don't know. Maybe I'll leave a word of wisdom, but. I used to be uptight about, well, I don't know enough about that, or I don't understand that, and sometimes you have to let it go. You don't need to be an expert in everything, but and I'll give my wife some credit for this, but she has a expression that she heard from someone that I live by now, and that's, you don't have to be the smartest one in the room. You just have to know who they are.
Yeah.
And so sometimes you're just a quarterback. Oh, I know so-and-so could help me with this. Why should I learn it in depth if I can leverage their knowledge?
So it sounds like do you actively seek those folks out as part of your network, as part of your
sure, and both internal and
operations?
external. Yeah. I've written a lot of policies, but I can't tell you that I've developed a lot of policies from scratch.
Sure.
You call someone who's done that before, or might be willing to share, at least here's what you don't do, type of thing. So absolutely I keep my contacts close.
That's
We
right.
talk all the time.
Make sure to keep networking, and it's a big deal. I remember when I was younger, I thought that networking was kind of a dirty word. What do you mean professional networking? I'm going to do my thing, and maybe my company or business can tell me what to do. But the power of being able to lean on those people cannot be denied. So
no, absolutely, and that's helped me get over that shyness, because I'm always trying to, if someone does something that I've never heard before, they're in an industry I'm not familiar with, well, tell me how that works.
Right.
And then maybe someday they can help you out. Hey,
Yeah.
remember we talked about this? I need some help with it.
That's right.
So
That's perfect. Well, Brent, hey, I want to say thank you so much for being on the show this morning.
Well, I appreciate it.
Great interview,
Appreciate
and
it.
we'll see you next time.
Okay, thanks.
Thank you so much for watching. Please comment below if there are topics you would like to see us cover, and make sure to subscribe.